6 days before Christmas, 1979. Cedar Rapids, Iowa. A city wrapped in holiday lights and the comfort of routine was about to be shattered by something unthinkable. That night, an 18-year-old high school senior named Michelle Martinko was found dead, slumped in the driver's seat of her car in the parking lot of the brand-new Westdale Mall. She had been stabbed 29 times. Not robbed. Not randomly assaulted. This was rage, personal, deliberate, and merciless. The night had started so differently. Michelle had attended a school choir banquet, dressed nicely for the occasion. Afterwards, she drove to the mall, a 2-month-old hotspot where teenagers hung out and families shopped for Christmas. The air outside was cold and still, the kind that bites at your skin, but inside the mall, it was bright and festive. Michelle moved through it like any other teenager, stopping to browse, chatting with friends, carrying a little over $180 in cash to pay for a winter coat her mother had put on layaway. But by 10 p.m., the mood shifted. The mall closed, and the crowd thinned until the lot outside felt eerily empty. Michelle walked to her 1972 Buick, parked in a darkened area, and climbed inside. Somewhere, in that shadowed expanse of asphalt and snow, someone was watching her. That person opened her passenger door. A knife flashed. What happened next would become one of Cedar Rapids' most haunting crimes, a mystery that would linger unsolved for nearly 40 years, wreck reputations, and test the patience of everyone who fought to solve it. To understand the shock this case caused, you have to know who Michelle Martinko was. She wasn't just another teenager in Cedar Rapids, she was the youngest daughter in a family that considered her a miracle. Her mother had suffered multiple miscarriages and was 44 years old when Michelle was born. Her older sister, Janelle, was already 12 and remembered the day vividly, the excitement, the joy, the sense that this baby had arrived against all odds. Michelle grew up with a warm, close-knit family, but life threw her some challenges. At the age of 12, she was diagnosed with scoliosis, a curvature of the spine. For 2 long years, she wore a rigid back brace that went from her neck to her hips. It was uncomfortable, it was heavy, and it made her feel different from her classmates. She became shy, self-conscious, often hiding behind her hair or her books. But when the brace came off at 14, it was like she bloomed overnight. Michelle was tall, with a striking smile and long, naturally blonde hair, the kind that caught the light and made people look twice. She joined the concert choir, made more friends, and even started dating. One of her most significant relationships was with a boy named Andy Seidel. They dated for about 2 years, but friends noticed Andy's possessive streak. He wanted to know where she was, who she was talking to, and why. When Michelle broke up with him, he didn't take it well. He stayed in her orbit, asking friends about her, making sure she knew he was still around. Another boy from her past was Mike Wyrick, an ex-boyfriend who was away at college when the murder happened. Police would question both men in the days after her death, along with nearly every male friend or acquaintance she had. In a small city like Cedar Rapids, that circle wasn't very big, and suspicion spread fast. At 18, Michelle was at a turning point. She was smart, social, and ready to start the next chapter of her life. But she would never get the chance. Someone decided her story would end in that cold, dark parking lot, and for decades, no one could prove who it was. December 19, 1979. Temperatures had dropped below freezing in Cedar Rapids, the kind of night where your breath turns to mist as soon as you step outside. After the choir banquet, Michelle drove to Westdale Mall, just 2 months old and already the social hub of the city. She had a purpose: check on the coat her mother had on layaway for Christmas. She also had $186 in cash tucked away in her purse. Inside, the mall buzzed with holiday shoppers. Friends who saw her said she looked a little distracted, even uneasy. At one point, she confided to someone that she felt like she might be followed. Still, she shopped, stopping to chat with classmates, picking up a few small items before closing time. At 10 p.m., the mall's music cut off, the lights dimmed in the storefronts, and people began heading for the exits. Michelle walked through the sliding doors into the night air, her breath clouding in the cold. Her car, a 1972 Buick, was parked a short distance away in a dimly lit section of the lot. She opened the driver's side door, slid in, and shut it behind her. At that moment, someone approached from the passenger side. The door opened, and a man climbed in without warning. A knife flashed in the darkness. The attack was sudden, frenzied, and close quarters. Michelle fought back hard, grabbing at the blade, twisting away, but the assailant kept coming. She suffered slash wounds on her hands, deep stabs to her chest and abdomen, 29 in total. This wasn't quick or impersonal. It was rage, unleashed in a small, confined space. When it was over, the man left her slumped in the driver's seat. Her purse was still there. Her cash was untouched. Her shopping bags were in the back seat. This wasn't about robbery. It wasn't even about sexual assault. There was no evidence of that. It was personal. The parking lot was nearly empty now, the cold air carrying no sound except the occasional hum of a passing car on the nearby road. Michelle's Buick sat silent under the pale glow of a street lamp. No one would discover what had happened until the next morning, when the horror inside would shock the entire city. The next morning, December 20th, 1979, Cedar Rapids police responded to a call about a car left overnight in the Westdale Mall parking lot. When officers approached the tan Buick, they saw Michelle inside, slumped toward the passenger seat. The crime scene was gruesome, blood on the upholstery, on her clothes, and, strangely, on the gearshift. Detectives immediately knew this was no random mugging. 29 stab wounds meant personal rage. The question was, whose? They started close to home. Michelle's ex-boyfriend, Andy Seidel, quickly became the primary focus. He had been seen at the mall that night. Friends described him as possessive. At her funeral, witnesses said he was so emotional he leaned into the casket, sobbing, even asking someone whether Michelle loved him or another ex, Mike Wyrick, when she died. It was unusual behavior, and it stuck in people's minds. Andy claimed he'd gone home after the mall closed, and his mother backed him up. But police knew, parents will protect their children. Without hard evidence, they couldn't arrest him. Still, the suspicion lingered for years. Mike, the other ex-boyfriend, was also questioned. He'd been more than 100 miles away at college that night, but police pressed him hard, even showing him graphic crime scene photos to see if he would break. His alibi held, and he was cleared. Detectives considered other possibilities, a stranger targeting Michelle for her cash, a would-be sexual assault gone wrong. But nothing was missing from her car, and there was no sign of that kind of crime. It didn't fit. The only solid physical evidence came from that strange bloodstain on the gearshift. In 1979, all they could do was type it, and it didn't match Michelle. That suggested the killer had cut himself during the attack. The sample was carefully preserved, even though the technology to test it didn't yet exist. For years, detectives chased leads that led nowhere. The case file grew to thousands of pages. By the late 1980s, the trail was cold. Then, in 2005, a cold case detective reopened the investigation. DNA testing had advanced dramatically. The blood on the gearshift and on Michelle's dress was analyzed, a male profile was developed and uploaded to CODIS, the national DNA database. No match. Over the next 13 years, police collected DNA from 160 men connected to Michelle's life. Every one of them was cleared, including Andy. It seemed like the case might never be solved. But in 2018, science would hand detectives a tool that could finally put a name to the DNA and change everything. By 2018, the investigation had hit the same wall for over a decade, a clear male DNA profile, but no match in any criminal database. That's when detectives decided to try something new, something still controversial at the time, genetic genealogy. They sent the unknown profile to Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in DNA phenotyping. Using the genetic markers, Parabon created a digital snapshot of what the killer might look like: fair skin, blue eyes, light hair. They also uploaded the profile to a public genealogy database, GeneMatch, where people voluntarily share their DNA to trace family history. The match that came back wasn't the killer, but it was a distant relative. From that clue, a genealogist built an elaborate family tree, branching out through decades of marriages, births, and moves. 3 names stood out: brothers, all living in Iowa. Investigators discreetly followed each brother, collecting discarded items: a toothbrush from one, a straw from another. 2 came back negative. The third was Jerry Lynn Burns, a 64-year-old businessman from Manchester, Iowa. Surveillance caught him drinking soda at a pizza restaurant. When he left, detectives grabbed the straw. The lab results were decisive. Burns' DNA was a perfect match to the blood on the gearshift in Michelle's dress. After nearly 4 decades, detectives had their man. On December 19, 2018, exactly 39 years after Michelle's murder, they walked into Burns' business and placed him under arrest. In the interview room, he denied knowing Michelle but made unsettling comments about blocking out traumatic events. At trial, the prosecution painted a picture of a calculated predator, a man who left home that night armed with a knife and gloves, found Michelle alone, and attacked her without mercy. The defense countered with a theory of secondary transfer, that Burns' DNA somehow ended up in the car without him being there, perhaps through contact before she even owned it. Prosecutors dismissed this as impossible, pointing out the intimate location of the bloodstains and the presence of his DNA on her clothing. After only a few hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Burns was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The guilty verdict brought a wave of relief across Cedar Rapids, but it was far from a happy ending. Michelle's parents had both died years earlier, never knowing the truth. For decades, suspicion had hung over people like Andy Seidel, who lived under the shadow of being seen as the likely killer. Andy was cleared by DNA years before Burns' arrest, but the stigma never fully disappeared. For Michelle's older sister, Janelle, the verdict was bittersweet. She had fought for years to keep Michelle's memory alive, attending anniversaries, speaking to detectives, and holding out hope that one day there would be answers. When those answers came, she described the moment as closure, but also a reminder of the decades lost without justice. The case became a symbol of persistence. It was worked on by 2 generations of detectives: Harvey Denlinger, who was on the force in 1979, and his son Matt, who ultimately helped close it in 2018. They proved that cold cases don't have to stay cold, as long as evidence is preserved and technology keeps advancing. Jerry Burns, meanwhile, maintained his innocence. His attorneys filed appeals, arguing about the use of genealogy databases and the reliability of DNA transfer evidence, but the conviction was upheld. There has been speculation about whether Burns may have been involved in other unsolved crimes, but so far, no confirmed links have been made. For the people of Cedar Rapids, the case also sparked conversations about privacy, technology, and the ethics of using public genealogy data in criminal investigations. Some saw it as a necessary evolution of policing, others worried about the precedent it set. But for those who knew and loved Michelle, there was no question: the right man was finally behind bars, and the long shadow of her murder had finally begun to lift. The murder of Michelle Martinko is a story about loss, but also about endurance. It's about a family that lived for decades without answers, a community that refused to forget, and investigators who refused to stop looking. When Michelle fought back in those final moments, she left behind the key to solving her own case: a drop of her killer's blood. In 1979, it was just another piece of evidence sealed in a bag. For nearly 40 years, it sat in an evidence locker, waiting for a technology that didn't yet exist. That small, silent trace became her voice, speaking for her long after she was gone. The case also shows how justice has changed. In the late 70s, solving a murder depended on eyewitnesses, confessions, and fingerprints. Today, science can map out a killer's family tree from a single cell. And while that raises questions about privacy and ethics, in Michelle's case, it ended a nightmare that had haunted an entire city. Her story is a reminder that justice doesn't always come quickly. Sometimes it takes years, even decades. But when evidence is preserved and people refuse to give up, the truth can still come to light. Michelle's life was stolen in a moment of violence, but her courage in fighting back helped ensure her killer was eventually found. And for the people who loved her, that final act means she never really stopped fighting, not until the very end.